It's still morning over here on the West Coast, Cormac. What's your excuse for drinking coffee?
It's only 1:08,
You gave up coffee. What are you
you know.
doing right now?
So I just started drinking coffee at noon.
Oh, okay. All
So
right. So you didn't give up caffeine completely.
yes, it was just temporary.
Good for you.
It was a reset. You know how those IT folks are. It's just like, did you reboot your machine?
Right.
Exactly. So that's what I needed to do.
All right. Well, we have a special guest this episode, and it's an old colleague of mine. I'm not going to tell the story. We actually have a listener question that we're going to address, and it's a very involved listener question, so much so that I had to bring in a heavy hitter for
A
this
subject matter
episode.
expert.
But I think the value will be very high still. So you're going to get Archispeak's version of a learning unit today. So we're going to welcome special guest Jeffrey Potter. And Jeff, I would love it maybe if you begin your story today of just tell us your story. Tell us your unconventional path to the architectural industry, profession, however you want to phrase it.
That's a good start. So it began in 2015, I think is when I started in this
As a
industry.
youngster.
Our past employer, Halloween was really big. And I started like 2 days before Halloween. And so super
You had a weird
intimidating.
introduction,
Oh,
weird
super
introduction to the.
Yeah, and there was, I won't say it, but there were some questionable costume choices that year. And they were asking if I wanted to be part of it. And it was one of those where I don't want to be that guy on HR's list, like
Shock
3 days
value.
in.
There was some
Yeah.
shock value, right?
Yeah. So my background for school was criminal justice. That's what I graduated in, minor psychology, graduated, tried the whole law school thing, didn't work out, and then wanted to see if law enforcement was a potential avenue. And so went through the whole motions. During that time, I was actually driving a forklift for a big distributor.
This
It's
is
a-
an incredible resume.
It's like, is this really what I want to do the rest of my life? I really want to drive a forklift, pack boxes, and like, no, this isn't really what I want to do. And so as I was going through this with law enforcement, that really wasn't panning out and really seeing like, nah, this isn't the career path for me. I went to my now wife, she's my girlfriend at the time, and said, I want something new. Can you just apply to any job that is on like Glassdoor or whatever? So
Any job. I'll
any
do
job,
anything.
anything.
And the vortex that is architecture sucked you up somehow,
Yes.
right? Like black hole the force is incredible, right?
Yeah. The spec job was one of like the 10 or 20 that she applied to. And I remember coming home one day and asking her, like, what'd you apply to today for me? And she was like, I did this one. I was like, why did you apply to that one? Like, I had no background in architecture, no background in construction. I think like a week later, I got a call like, hey, you want to interview for it? And I was
Like,
yeah.
we'll take anyone. They'll
Yeah.
literally take anyone.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's
this
one
was
way.
like a spec assistant job. I think it was like spec coordinator was the title. So I went in and interviewed for it. And it was with, you remember Joe and Sherry, sat down at the table. And the first thing that Sherry did was slam this like 1,500 page project manual and was like, this is what we do. And in my head, I'm like, you write that thing from scratch? Like, there's no way I'll ever be able to write the entire project manual by scratch. I didn't realize, what specifications are actually like templates, that whole thing. But I really tried to sell myself. And when I heard that the firm was like this 4-10 schedule, every other Friday off, and the Fridays you worked, you got donuts or bagels, like that was a selling point for me. It was like, yeah, I want this. Like, I don't care about if I like it or not. I want donuts or bagels every other Friday. And so, long story short, I got the position. I started almost immediately and fell in love with it. Joe and Sherry really took me underneath their wings. Day one was, all right, do you know what a spec is? No. All right. A specification is 3 parts. Here's how it breaks out. Here's some reading materials on project delivery methods. This is what you're going to be doing the first month, is just kind of learning at a high level what specification writing is, how the delivery method kind of impacts what we do. That's really how I got started.
Man, crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's just
I'd
like
say that's a pretty
unconventional.
unconventional path to, you know, architectural spec writing.
And he came in with zero knowledge of what a spec even was. And he
Yeah.
used the term spec and specification and specifier. Like these are all derivatives of each other. So a spec is a derivative of specification, which is part of the delivery process of a project, right, Jeff? So we got a question from a listener. So I'm going to once again just tout that we started a new website out there called askarchispeak.com. You can head over to that website and you can, there's nothing to register for. You don't have to, create a login or anything. Just type in your question and get it answered on the show. And we got a lengthy question, which I thought demanded an expert, a subject matter expert, but also a lengthy discussion. This is not something that we could just kind of get through 5 minutes. This is a longer discussion. This is an anonymous question, and I think there's good reason for that. Somebody's not looking to become known for asking this question, but because this plays off of other topics we've had in the past on the podcast regarding jumping around. And I think I've cited it's pretty well known figure that people who jump around firm to firm make 50% more than those who do not. And I don't have a citation for that, but that is kind of secondhand what I've heard. Cormac, you could probably verify if you felt that is potentially correct. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on what skills you have. It depends on position, I'm sure. But overall, I mean, your overall sense that people who jump around earn more than people who stay in architecture firms?
Yeah, it's definitely been my experience and friends that I've helped look for jobs that they're like, hey, I'm stuck here and I want to kind of hit my ceiling here, both in terms of responsibility and in pay. And so I want to look around and see what else is out there. And I've heard almost every case of that, depending on the economy, location, where they may be relocating to if it's out of state. But for the majority, everybody that I've ever talked to usually has an upward mobility, at the very least, in their salaries.
To stay at firms, I mean, there's also this issue of advocacy and people who go to bat for you to make sure that you're compensated and kept at that firm. Another way that maybe it doesn't work, they have figured out the way to kind of, make a great lifestyle just by staying at a firm for extremely long periods of time, right? Like decades. I'm seeing LinkedIn anniversaries show up in the over 25 years, people staying at the same firm, even recently. So, I mean, it's not like everybody moves around for that reason alone either, right? So I have a footnote here, and I will say that I think a lot of people don't leave a firm unless they get an offer that's higher, right? And so I bring that up because in the question that I'm going to read, it's like people always, quote unquote, make more who leave. I think people pretty much only leave if they're going to get offered more. Yeah. Well, those are the stories you hear because you don't hear about the stories where people don't leave because they weren't offered more money. So I think that's kind of an important asterisk to put up front. The listener says, I have thought long and hard about a podcast from a month or two ago, and I don't know when we got this question in. It's fairly recent, but we'll have to go back and look at our episode numbers to include something in the show notes. It says, where you are commenting about young designers and how they deal with this industry financially. And one of those ways, salary-wise, is to jump firms. I, of course, have witnessed this even in my own firm, and I delight in working with someone. That seems to be the story that we all tell ourselves. Well, I am a specifier. So this is where our guest for this episode comes in as the subject matter expert, because this is really around that type of role in a firm. And the listener says, I will not mince words. I came to this position with no experience. Again, kind of applicable to our guest today, but now have 8 years. And maybe I know a few things. I also admit I have much to learn, but I have been, and this is in all caps, aghast as I put myself out there to obtain new position, to see salary offers that are substantially below what I am currently making. This goes against everything you, meaning Cormac and I, have ever bantered about on the podcast. You're supposed to make more money at the next job, right? Or maybe not. is this just how architectural specifiers are perceived? So I think now the question becomes like, well, if everybody's making more money and I'm a specifier and I'm going out there and I'm getting lower offers, is this just a specifier thing, right? So is this just how architectural specifiers are perceived, that we are worth so little that it is somehow justified to offer us less than what we might currently be making if we are just desperate to find work? It says, I may sound imperious but in this moment, but I would love a measured response. My impression is that one could be a complete milquetoast designer, work somewhere for a year, and then move elsewhere, earn more money, rinse, repeat, earn lots more money. But those of us in niche positions are kind of stuck. We may never earn more than we currently make because essentially our work isn't that valued. It is, but isn't, or I honestly don't know. The important question here is just regarding the role of specifications, what the value is for firms to have that role in-house, and what they're worth, what they see is worth paying for that position. And then industry-wide, what's the value of a specifier? Is it going up? And then that's why we have Jeff on the show. So Jeff, I mean, maybe let's just start at the 30,000 foot level and just talk about this from an industry perception. So maybe you can continue your story now from your role as a specifier to what you've gone on to do after being a specifier, and like the decisions that you made through that transition.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. So when I started spec writing, there wasn't any thought about where this could take me. A couple years in, I realized, you know what, I'm actually pretty good at this. Like, we can make this a career. And so started thinking about, okay, what's it going to take to get to the next step? I definitely got lucky in some areas. Joe and Sherry, the two spec writers on staff, there's three plus me, but they retired within a month of each other. And when they retired, I was still a specification coordinator. Joe and I had talked briefly about my career path before he left. When he left, nothing ever came. I was still a spec coordinator. I used that job description to basically prove that I needed a promotion to a spec writer. When I went to the new boss, I said, hey, you know, technically I can't write specs. I'm not a spec writer. I'm a spec coordinator. It's not in my job description. You only have one full-time spec writer who you expect to write. You know, at the time we're doing, gosh, I think like 100 plus new projects a year. We're billing to, a couple hundred projects. You really expect him to do everything? And it was like, oh, well, write down everything that you've accomplished, give it to me, and we'll see where it can go. Ended up getting the promotion to, I think it was like spec writer level 1. That was fantastic. Part of that email was about salary. The expectation of what a spec writer 1 was and my salary expectations, they didn't meet. I thought I was still very much underpaid. And so I developed this mindset of like having to continuously prove that I'm worth it and that I need to be compensated more than what I was. And so then a year went by, might have been like a year and a half, and I'm sitting here saying like, I'm doing most of the work. I'm doing really good at this. Everybody enjoys working with me. I think it's time to make the next step. Again, I had to go back to management and say, hey, here's everything that I'm doing. Can I get a promotion? Same thing happened. Had to justify it. Came back, yes. Or the second time, my salary expectations from, reading the web and talking to some others was that I was still underpaid. The great thing was I went from hourly to salary. That was very nice. But in the back of my mind, it was still very much like, okay, now I have to again continuously prove that I'm worth more. And
Welcome, Dark, right? Like
exactly.
this is important
Mhm.
to say at this point.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think for me, with social media and movies these days, it's like, oh, when I ask for more money, I'm thinking that, oh, it's going to be like $20,000, $30,000 more than I'm making now. My experience in this industry is that those types of financial jumps don't happen unless you move, right? If I'm making, let's just for simplicity of math, if I'm making 50 and I think I'm worth 90, and you go to your firm and say, hey, I'm worth 90, I want 90 or I want 100, most likely you're not going to get, I developed this mindset that I am not replaceable. Everybody's replaceable. Everybody,
Totally agree.
this was like this big kind of growing up that I had to do during this whole time about salary expectations and the way it works and the way that the role bands are, or the job bands, right? You can't have like a level 1 project engineer make as much as a project engineer level 3, right? Like that doesn't really happen. When you get promoted, then you move up to the next salary band. That's typically what I'm learning through all of this. And so as I was working, this was probably around 2018, I was like, all right, I think it's time to look elsewhere. And so I started applying, and I went through a series of interviews with another large firm, and we got to the salary conversation. It was definitely a lot more than what I was making, but it didn't meet my expectation of what I was actually worth. And so the discussions kind of fell apart. But I used that to go back to my boss and say, hey, I had an offer for this. I can leave and go make this amount, which was a substantial more than what I was making. And I got promoted again to, I think it was like level 3, but a salary didn't meet my expectations. It was a relatively small bump. And so again, here I am thinking like, what do I need to do? My loyalty is to this firm. This firm is a fantastic place to work. I love it. Everybody there is fantastic. Nothing bad to say about them. But is this just part of the culture of the industry to where, yeah, if I want a sizable jump, I'm going to have to leave? Through the COVID years, it really was working from home. I ended up being the only specification writer on staff and was literally doing all of this. And throughout this time, I got extremely efficient in specs. I got to the point where I got bored writing specs. There's this Aaron Rodgers documentary that came out. He's sitting on the bus after he wins a Super Bowl, and he has this thought of like, what's next? Like, I just won the Super Bowl. What do I do next? That was the thought that I had during the COVID years. Was I accomplished everything that I set out to. I'm bored. I'm on autopilot. I literally can fall asleep and write specs. Like, that's how good I got. What is out there for me next? What's the next challenge? Found this role at Deltec and went through the whole interview process and was like, you know what? This is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity where if it doesn't pan out, I can always fall back to spec writing. But if it works out, like, this is fantastic. That's where I'm at today. The hard part about all of this was that firm loyalty. I got sick for multiple weeks deciding whether I wanted to leave or not. I couldn't eat. I was on certain medications. It was very bad because of how stressed I was making this decision of, this firm has been great to me. I don't want to leave. But at the time, my wife and I already had our oldest daughter. We were looking to have a second one, grow our family. We had decided that because of childcare costs and some other things, that it was beneficial for her to stay home. We couldn't do that off of the salary that I was making. And so it was really like this lifestyle decision of, okay, what path do I want to go? Do I want to stay here and work at a great place, knowing that, this is what I am making, whereas I can get a really big significant jump and it can support the lifestyle that I want to make. And so I made that decision.
This episode is made possible with support from TimberTech. The conversation around outdoor spaces is being redefined. TimberTech, everything wood should be, is at the forefront of a technical renaissance in synthetic decking, transforming how architects approach design. TimberTech's advanced materials merge innovative engineering with striking aesthetics. Proprietary polymer capping and precision color blending mimic the natural beauty of hardwood, authentic wood grain patterns, rich tonal depth, and elegant matte finishes. But unlike wood, TimberTech is built to endure, resisting moisture, fading, and even resist wildfires, with warranties that set a new industry standard. Sustainability drives this renaissance. TimberTech boards are composed of up to 85% recycled materials. For every 15 by 15 TimberTech deck, up to 40 full trash bags of recycled PVC are kept out of landfills. A closed-loop manufacturing process ensures these materials support both your designs and the environment. Flexible design options empower your vision. From multi-width boards to heat-bending capabilities, TimberTech pushes the boundaries of what outdoor spaces can achieve, seamlessly blending with the indoor aesthetic. Explore the advancements behind this shift. Visit timbertech.com/architects with an S to access samples and reimagine your next project. TimberTech, everything wood should be. Go check out timbertech.com/architects and check out everything they have to offer, and let them know that you heard about them on the Archispeak podcast. Our thanks to TimberTech for supporting this episode. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Oh, so much to unpack here. Because I would say one thing, Jeff, because let's just say, and I've said this to people who've left firms that I've worked for and stuff like that. It's just that there's just really no good time to quit, obviously. But it's you recognizing for yourself what's best for you, what's best for your family. And I know Evan and I can speak to our own experiences with this. You have to make that decision. You said something about your loyalty to the firm, and we all have experienced the loyalty from our side. And a lot of times people don't necessarily get that reciprocated loyalty. You're talking about things like, I've looked around, I've seen where my value could be in other places with a salary bump of X or Y or Z. And, I want to stay here, but I also want to sort of feel that love of knowing what my worth is on the open market. Do you know what my worth is here? I don't know where we want to go with this conversation, but there's so many things that I've been thinking about. One, when we got the listener question, but then I was doing a little bit of homework talking to our firm spec writer. I was talking to other project managers about how they bill for specifications and spec writing on our projects. A lot of times there's this kind of skewed perspective of what a spec writer does. So I'm going to just throw this out here. This could be a direction of we could go somewhere else, but understanding and specifically thinking about the listener question was specifications. Yes, it is an unfortunate side effect in our profession is that the people who specialize in doing that, we don't place the same kind of value on their project contribution as others, say, project architect or project manager or things like that. In that is the false narrative of, specifications are it is a 50% equal of the contract documents. As much as we place these massive importance on the drawings, if the specifications don't support those drawings, whether it's through design or your construction techniques or whatever, the project will fail. And so, they place the equal performance here or equal level of importance.
Weight. Yeah.
Exactly. On both. In that, there is no one greater than the other.
What the role of a specifier is worth to the company then? Because that's really what we're talking about here is we're talking about risk mitigation.
Yes. And that's the point where I was going is that,
But they don't.
I was talking to so there's a little, this is a very timely conversation that we're having here. So, for full transparency, our specifier, he's getting ready to retire in not too distant future. And so now we as a firm are starting to scramble, okay, what is next? Do we look at spec point? Do we look at a third party specifier that we bring in? Or do we look to hire higher in. And so we're actually weighing all three options as options that we would be pursuing within the firm. And so, I don't know if they're going to be mad at me for saying this or not, but put an ad out on the streets for a specifier. Our specifier told me what he was getting paid. And I was sort of floored. Not because it was low, because it was like joyfully high, to be quite honest with you. Higher than me. I'm not saying that he doesn't earn it because, if you think about it, Jeff, the position that you were put in as one of maybe one or two specifiers that were working on that level of project number throughout the year means that you have a 50% stake in the risk management
Profile.
liability
Yeah, risk profile
for
of every
every
project.
single solitary project. That's where the project specifier, that's where the value actually lies in ensuring that, we always say drawings are not always 100% and stuff. Well, specs a lot of times save us when the drawings aren't quite there because, we know that, okay, we're going to design somewhat around a basis of design and the specs are there to support it. The specs are there to support it if there's a question or things like that, that levels of importance, that 50-50 level of importance of the drawings are going to give you X amount of information. The specs are going to give you X amount of information. Together, you get that 100% of the information and hopefully liability-free project. If one is less than the other, then you've got problems. I'm listening to your story and listening to the thoughts of the listener question. It kind of concerns me when firms don't see that as an equal, at minimum, an equal importance to a project performance, the project success, keeping us out of litigation because they think that, oh, well, you're not an architect. So, what are you contributing? You are contributing at minimum 50% of risk management to a project.
Yeah. And
I think there's that aspect, Jeff, but the question is like, do firms value specifiers? So I think it ties right in with what Cormac is asking, because it kind of depends who you ask. Talking to risk management, okay. But if you're talking, or if you're talking to the C-suite, or if you're talking to, somebody who is either, directly involved in whether you are going to get that value in your role through the form of a paycheck, through your pay scale. Right.
Yeah.
Because I think the important thing to point out here that maybe people don't realize about large firms, like you've heard Jeff say, I was the single specifier when we were in the COVID times, right? The firm is doing 100 projects a year. How many project teams is that, Jeff? How many project teams are there in the firm doing 100 projects a year? Like,
exactly.
Of course, we can say there's a lot of copy and paste and master specs and all of these things that really help accomplish this. Like you took it on but of course you would have loved more help, right? I'm like, so I just want to throw that out there as you're kind of formulating your response and where we go next.
Yeah. When you were texting me earlier this week, I kind of had this moment of when you talk about value or worth, there's actually, I think, two parts to it. There's the financial value, and then there's the impact of the position value. Everybody that I've talked to, and I talked to a lot of folks at Deltek, no one has ever said that they don't value specifications or specification writers. Even my own firm back in the day had the financial side is very different though. And I don't know if it's, hey, this firm over here pays way more than this firm over here. I don't necessarily think that means that they value specifications more or less. I think it's maybe more, what's more valuable to a firm, somebody that brings in the work or somebody that prevents lawsuits, right? Because that's really kind of like, when you think about it, that's what specs do, right? They keep you out of legal issues. That there's no seeable result, right? Like you don't know the impact that somebody has because it's never an issue, right?
Like somebody didn't happen.
Yeah, somebody that breathes in the work,
and they do.
You can see the impact, right? So I think it's It's
So,
tough.
so I'll follow up with that. This is a conversation that we're having in our firm. My firm's a lot like your past firms. In fact, I've actually even interviewed for your past firm. We have a lot of repeat customers or clients because of the job that we do, the way that we've managed it, the way that we produced our documents, the way that we avoided risks, avoided litigation, and assisted with a whole slew of problem solvings is equally as valuable and is equally as important as the person who's going and knocking on the doors and saying, hey, can we provide you architectural services? And we find more often than not that we get a lot of repeat clients because of the work that we do. And that is equal measure of architecture from the documentation standpoint, and the architecture from the architectural specification standpoint. You cannot have one without the other. If you want this great design, you better have great specs. Because if you don't have great specs, guess what? You're not going to get the great design because they are one in the same.
How well shared is that sentiment, though, Cormac, in the office? Would you say across like a cross section of a team, you have that sense, and you're beating?
Yeah.
Do they understand that?
I think
Or
I'm not a solo trumpeter here trying to just say, remember, not only do you have to do good drawings, but you got to do good specs. I think a lot of people realize that and understand that. The way that we work and operate with our spec writer is that they're an integral part from, at minimum, SD. Sometimes they're even early on, depending on the client, way early into concepts. If they are looking for specific information, where we basically carry them all the way to the end of construction document phase, so CD phase, or even into CA phase, because that's consistency. You always get contractors who are looking for substitution requests. We present that to our spec writer to kind of verify whether or not the substitution works with the basis of design or the approved equals or things like that. We really do stress here the importance of the specs as a part of all of that. I have worked for firms that don't. I've worked for firms that basically do a lot of cut and paste of it. And I remember my first spec that I ever wrote, what a miserable thing that was, because I was told, hey, this project's a lot like that project. Why don't you take that spec and just reformat all the headers and footers and things like that, update it. And of course, because of my time constraints and things like that, managing the project and coordinating drawings and coordinating everybody else, that, for lack of a better term, it was half-assed. And it goes out to bid. We have this conversation with the bidders where we start to get RFIs coming in and they're like, can you tell me what the design intent for this spec section is? Because this manufacturer is either out of business or they haven't made that product for 15 years. And a lot of times the project architects are in such a siloed space, they don't have the time to do all of the research with the manufacturer. So we rely on our specifiers to do that for us. When they're doing their specifications and we're providing, say, cut sheets, or, they're looking through the drawings to kind of ensure, they'll basically say, like, ours is very interactive with all of the different project teams. Hey, do you understand, Cormac, that this project I'm looking at your design intent and it really doesn't do exactly what you're looking for. However, I did find this product that can actually meet and achieve or exceed what you're looking for. And, there is no change in design because, of course, architects, I don't want to change my design. Obviously, that's a cost killer as well. So, to your question, I think that we personally, and to be honest with the way that we bill for a specifier, we put them on the same level as, say, a senior project architect or a project manager in basically the billable hours that or at least the
rate.
The rate. Yes. And then, again, I didn't ask him, but he offered it up, that his salary is very well compensated for the amount of work that he's requested to do. Because, Jeff, just like what you were saying, is with the amount, the firm that I work for isn't as large as your old firm, but does a lot of the similar projects, and we do a lot of projects. I have 3 projects right now. Let's just say he has 75, 80 projects that he has to deal with, that he has to touch, that he has to interface with not just the project teams, but also the engineers and all of those other things. So, I mean, again, it goes back to the value. What are you bringing to the table? And because of the value that we put in our firm as a spec writer, as valuable as, say, a project manager or a senior project architect, we take care of them.
Well, I'm going to point out where your firm has completely failed in basically creating a role of mentorship in that place. And it could be that they want that, but they haven't hired somebody to shadow and learn from this individual to become the person who comes in and takes over that role when they leave. Because you said they just put a job out on the street, right? Yeah. Clearly, they don't have this person in mind. And of course, you would love to hire somebody in who already has all this knowledge. And maybe Jeff can speak to this, because you can defend your firm all you want, but I think there's a lot of firms in this position where it's like, oh my God.
Absolutely.
I mean, Jeff, you were in an incredible place to have two mentors at your earliest stage, which was great because you didn't know jack about the position. Even bringing somebody in with a specifications background, they still need to learn the ways of the firm, but all of those things. And if they're going to seriously wait until ready to retire to do that, it's way too late. I see this in many roles in firms. They're not proactively, like, this is the job of leadership, is find your successors and train them before something happens.
Absolutely.
And there's, as a business decision, which is what salaries are, and it's all of these things they're business decisions. Like, this is a huge blind spot in our industry on many levels, but seriously in specifications, because there aren't that many people out there willing to do those roles. Like, people do not go to architecture school to become specifiers. Jeff, I guess this question's for both of you. Cormac, you're clearly talking about, to me, it sounds like an architect doing specifications. The person writing the question into the show is not an architect, came in with zero experience. Same time, my question is the value higher when it is, because that person has professional, let's just call it liability. Maybe they do, maybe they don't actually have liability in the firm, but they've been trained in architecture. I'm just wondering if that changes the perception of the role in the individual. In your experience, if you have any thoughts on that, maybe you do, maybe you don't.
It shouldn't be, because it's not about the person, it's about what is being produced. And if you can get it produced through whichever means, project architect, specification writer, that the end result is still part of that deliverable, that is part of your risk management, and should be respected regardless of who's doing it. So I'm going to throw it over to Jeff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of specifiers that I know have started in a similar boat where they don't have experience and they are really great specifiers. I think that there's this misconception that you need 20, 30 years of industry experience to actually begin to write specs. I think you can literally be a full-time, full-fledged specifier within 5 years. I don't think it takes that long. The one, and I'm going to make an assumption here, is when you're working with somebody that does not have an architecture background, or maybe they do, but it's not as experienced, that individual is more flexible and potentially more eager to learn because they don't have that experience. So like in my case, I had to have like this come to Jesus moment where I needed to say out loud to everybody that came to me, I actually don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to this question, but I'll find out for you. And when you have that attitude, regardless of the position that you're in, that is really, really valuable to project teams. And then you build upon that and you learn. And when you are 20, 30 year veteran of the industry, yeah, you might have that answer, but it almost, I feel like, pigeonholes the potential solution into, this is how I've done it, this is how we've always, like, that is on in the industry. And so if you came to me and said, hey, The big thing in California when I started was Cal Green, and we had to throw CI up on the outside of the wall and all this. And it's like, okay, hey, I have to do this. What are the solutions, right? And, hey, here are 4 or 5 viable solutions that you could go here. I'm not saying you won't get that with somebody that's much more experienced, but it's like, hey, this is what we did on the past project. We're just going to reuse it again and again and again.
Yeah.
Specifier, 100 projects. Like,
Yeah.
you're telling me, you're saying like it can't be like that. And that is exactly what it is over and over again, because there's just not enough people to do these roles. And it's kind of crazy to me that firms only have this for 1 or 2 roles.
Right.
Can handle the workload if you automate it to that level. Say, right. I'm not talking high tech here, but at the same time, it's like, the things that you're talking, those are huge liabilities, the way we've always done it, right? New innovate, there's other products out there that people just don't know about that have been around for 10, 20 years. And it's new to you when you find it. And there's no time for product research. Like, you're waiting for people to come to you at the lunch and learn and tell you about these things because it's your lunch hour. And you're not going to spend your lunch hour researching new products, because like, enough is enough, right? Like, you're there to do your job, and man, you're just bringing up so many issues in the industry that we seem totally content, the royal we as an industry, totally content just continuing with. And it's kind of crazy. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to something that friend of the show, Evelyn Lee, 2025 AIA president, posted on LinkedIn, and her clickbait headline, which is fantastic. The future of architecture is bright. Too bad firms keep pushing talent out. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's the lead, right? That's the hook. And then she says, architecture schools keep churning out passionate, creative designers ready to shape the built environment. I don't think this is relegated just to designers, right? Or even architecture graduates. I think this directly applies to what we're talking about. And year after year, an alarming number of them take one look at traditional practice and say, yeah, no thanks. And she cites some numbers here because, I don't think this just applies to architecture graduates, but it says, the U.S. will see a 15% drop in high school graduates by 2025, meaning fewer students even considering architecture. By 2030, we could see a shortfall of 80,000 architects. Firms are struggling to retain the people they already have. Industry-adjacent roles, like the one that you have at Deltec now, Jeff, you went industry-adjacent to the software side, but it's still directly relating to architects. And then 8,500 architects leave the profession each year, many due to retirement, which I think speaks directly to this role. We see a lot of older individuals in specification roles in firms, right? If you're kind of an exception, and potentially our guest questioner is in that boat as well. I think this speaks to the exposure. How is the industry attracting talent in all kinds of roles, not just design roles and technology roles, non-competitive salary ranges? You can get paid a heck of a lot more for a heck lot less risk in other professions and industries. The salary range in traditional architecture is basically $50K to $200K. Many professions have starting salaries at $100K or more. That's the first thing a lot of people are looking at when they're trying to decide where they want to go in their career. This just opens the door to the way architecture firms do business. They're not willing to look at new business models. They're competing to do more with less because of lower fees. And I mean, corporations' job really is to pay everybody on staff as little as possible to do the most that they can. Like, that's the definition of like how you earn profit, right? So there's a lot of things pulling in different directions here. I'm just curious I thought this was a timely post that Evelyn put up on LinkedIn. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. And I'll just point out one comment that another friend of the show, Lucas Gray, put on there. It says, actually, I already read it. I didn't even realize it. This was something that Lucas said. He said, you can get paid a heck of a lot more for a heck of a lot less risk in other professions. So that was his comment. And I thought that was really appropriate for like adding on to. And so again, we'll put a link to her post in the show notes. You'll see Lucas's comment in there and others' comments as well. I think there's a lot of people who are I mean, we've had Jake Rudin on the podcast before from Out of Architecture, right? Big advocate for people getting paid their value in architecture, and firms just not offering that to people, right? Because of the way that the profession has operated for decades and decades. You guys have any thoughts about that angle of it?
Not coming from any architecture background and being at a firm for as long as I was and seeing the younger generations come in, the expectation is that, again, from what I see, is I'm going to be designing, I'm going to change the world. Well, truth is, you're doing bathroom details for 10 years. You're a Revit junkie. I mean, that's really kind of what you are for a good portion of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you told me this, and I had to look it up to kind of validate it, but how long does it take for an individual to be licensed as an architect within this industry? It's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 11, 12, 13 years.
I think it's 13 now. Back when I did it, that was the average.
That's crazy.
That was an average. And I are both beyond that.
Yeah.
Well, we were both 17 years into our career when we got licensed,
Right.
because of the challenges and everything else, right?
Yeah, that's after 5 years of school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's so,
So
when
23.
you think about the pay scale that we've been talking about, the average pay of an architect was somewhere in the range of 130 or something, whatever Glassdoor said. That's the average pay. So if I'm not a licensed architect, and when I do get licensed, I'm probably at like level 1 or something, right? So I'm not even close to that range. And I'm not going to promote another profession here, but the trades are really suffering. And when you compare, hey, I can go do a trade or I can become an architect. And in 10 years, you may even have the ability to start your own contracting business, right? Like there is much better growth and opportunity on that side. Plus you have unionization, which I think is also an interesting point. I was kind of looking at this earlier this week about and thinking, because I saw Evelyn's post as well, like what would shift this narrative, right? If we're talking about doing things slowly, this is like a generational shift that we're not going to see, anytime soon. What could be an overnight impact to this? And it's like, well, we all say like the model is broken. What can immediately fix the model? Unionization, right? Is that good or bad? I don't know. But if we're looking for solutions about having to not work as much, fair pay, when you talk about AI coming in, job protections and all of this, like that's something that we all have to think about. Otherwise, the industry in 5 to 10 years is not going to be in the same spot that it's going to be in now. And it very well could be in a worse position than it is trying to find resources and things like that.
I'll just say that I think one thing that the profession actually does give to individual, and I'll say architects, but I think it applies to the specifications role as well, is an avenue to do something yourself. Like every person is equipped to not have to work at a large firm, not be beholden to those rules, but then the onus is on the individual to figure all of that out, right? To write their own contracts, become consultants for firms, or just run their own practices,
Right.
And create their vision, their model that they want to pursue. And it doesn't have to be based on those old models at all. And something that Cormac and I have talked about, and maybe Jeff, you could speak to this a little bit because of the role that you're in now at Dell Tech and in a technology company, right, is like the tool stack for an architect today. Big firms don't, I mean, there's a lot of resources in big firms, but for the most part, the workflow hasn't shifted away from BIM, in quotes, right? But there's a lot of new tools out there that enable people to do a lot more with a lot less and really focus on where the value of an architect lies. Do you see that for specifiers as well? With technology, are you comfortable handling that many projects? What now would you say is different about specifications than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that you really feel like puts you maybe in an advantageous perspective and role for a company or as a consultant.
Yeah. The technology has improved quite a bit. At the age of the specifier is only going up. So the audience is not getting younger. When you look at Generation X, the attention span of Gen X is about like 8 to 10 minutes. When you look at millennials, it's about 10 to 12 seconds. And then when you get to Gen Z, it's like 8 to 10 seconds. Well, they're flipping through TikTok and Instagram all day, right? Our brains are becoming more visual than what they were in the past. When you look at a specification, is that visually appealing? No. Writing specifications is very boring. And that was the worst
This is why
part
most
of
architects
the
are
job.
allergic to specifications.
Right? So we're trying to take the path of you're always going to need a 3-part spec because of lawyers for contract and whatever else. Are there alternative ways to achieve that 3-part spec besides looking at text? That's what we're looking at. We're trying to gear for. We know that this spec writer is probably there's other roles within a firm that touch specs but are not necessarily seeing the specs, right? A Revit junkie is modeling like a curtain wall or a storefront. They're looking at product data sheets, but they don't see the impact. So is there a way that we can connect the two so that they are able to connect the dots visually and transfer information from one to the other and then output a 3-part spec without really having to look at the specifications completely? So
the way that it's been done in the past, what do you mean? We've been trying out the Deltek specs. I don't know if you know this, Evan, but Deltek purchased Master Spec, and now it's all run through that. And then there's the program, Spec Point, that is evolving out of that. The spec writing process a little bit more interactive, a little bit more engaging, so that it's a lot easier. I mean, but if you think about it, the reason why people either did the cut and paste method or didn't want to get into it at all was because they're sitting there reading thousands of layers of text and it's just boring. And it's just like, I don't understand what the ASTM requirements are for this, so I don't want to do it. But then there's where it's starting to evolve into other ways of writing specs that's a lot user friendly. Being able to instill within kind of like the master spec kind of like realm, but making it a little bit easier for the user to adopt and understand, okay, this is, as Jeff, you're saying, because you're far more geared towards it. But yeah, one of my smaller projects is kind of like the test mule for Spec Point. So that
but they're basically outsourcing specifications away from a spec writer. We kind of talked about this a lot when we were going through the motions here, because your workload was so big. How can people help? Because they're not hiring. You can't hire.
Right.
People don't want to. But like that's what we're talking about here, Cormac, right? We're talking about using a tool to get the team more involved in specifications, because specifications aren't going away and there's a limited bandwidth, or there's not enough people doing that.
I will say we're approaching it a slightly different way, that we still are not trying to eliminate the role of a spec writer.
Yeah, I'm outsourcing to outside the company, but outsourcing the creation of a spec book to the team much more so than it ever has been in the past, because I correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, I don't even know actually. So how does that work? Because is it still based on the model, or is it actually a completely separate app, but it's just easier to use now because people have more.
So we believe that the role of the specifier is going to change in 5 to 10 years, that it's not going to be the same as it is today. The tools that we have in place now are really geared about selecting products. So we have this feature in Spec Point called product selection. And
this is not sponsored by Jeff, if you could.
Yeah, bring it up. But basically it's like as the individual goes through the spec, they can actually select products that they want to add, and then it automates certain parts of part 2 so that they don't have to specify. When the most time-sucking part of spec writer, it's really the product research. So how can we make a single source of truth, bring products in there, and then open it up to the entire team to select products? Because really, a spec writer, if you are a sole spec writer at a firm, in all honesty, you're only as good as the information that you get from the project team, right? Like, if you come to me and say, hey, I want this scoreboard, dude, this is a blank product sheet. Like, you didn't tell me anything. I need to, right? How do we shift that narrative to put the onus on the product team to actually supply that information first? And then can we actually automate it so that you're not necessarily taking the specifier out of the equation? It's just that the role is changing to more of this information management type of role, very similar to a BIM manager, right? So the Revit model, they're creating, Revit families from scratch, doing whatever they need to do. The specification writer may turn into something like that, where they're managing the specifications, but they're not actually per se writing them, selecting options, choices, doing that sort of thing. So it's a really interesting avenue that we're taking.
Yeah.
Go for it, Cormac.
Well, I was going to say to that point, one of the comments that we've made in past conversations and within our office is when we start to have this disconnect from the project team to the specifications, where somebody has said, well, what do the specs say? I'm like, I don't know, I didn't write it. You have that kind of complete disconnect in 50% of your contract documentation. Looking at avenues like this, they're starting to engage the project team in understanding what's actually part of the overall deliverable, so that they can't use that excuse of like, I don't know, I didn't write the spec. You get a little bit more interaction. And that, I'll say that that's sort of been the soapbox that I've been pulling out and yelling from, is like, we need to have people fully understand every bit of what's going out on the streets, because as you're managing it through construction administration, if you're unfamiliar with what is actually in the specifications, you're already working backwards. You're not being
But there's no way to do that. I mean, the point is it has to be easily accessible. And
yes,
you can
right.
do
Totally
what
agree.
Jeff did and say, man, I'll find out, right? Like that, that information. And guess what?
Yeah.
We're only putting even more into our projects now because of technology, right? And CYA and all of those things.
Yeah.
I agree. Like, yeah, man, that would be fantastic if more people knew and didn't just point fingers and say, I don't know, that person did it. It's probably, throwing your own teammate. But it does happen. Instead, just like shared ownership of this of the project deliverables.
Yeah.
So I guess final question is just overall sentiment. Does the profession, do firms value specifiers? I mean, Jeff, what do you think as far, you've been the closest to the metal on this. What's your gut feeling say about that?
Does the industry value the role of the spec writer? Yeah, I think most firms do value the spec writer and what they bring to the table. Do they value the financial compensation of the spec writer? I think that's a different story. And I think we see that not just within a spec writer, but in a lot of positions where it's, you do have people leave because financially it just doesn't make sense to stay. Or you do see people hop there and hop and hop, and it's not necessarily vertical improvement, it's horizontal improvement, right? So I think it's not black or white in that sense. There's a lot to this conversation that scratched the surface on.
Evan, if we inserted spec writer, project architect, or whatever in kind of that thing, it really is a yes or no answer, because there's yes, but... And Jeff hit it, perfectly.
Yes, and.
Yeah, because I think Jeff hit it right on the head, is that I think we know that there's the importance of the specifications as part of the overall deliverables, but how do we value and pay properly the people who are actually doing them? I don't think a lot of firms really sit back and think about the implication of doing a good or bad job as part of risk management. And so it's as much as everybody else in our profession is assessing where the values are. I think you said it best earlier in the conversation about it is the corporation's job to get the most for the least. And, even our clients ask for the most for the least. Jeff, you said this, there is going to need to be a shift, a cultural shift in placing value far beyond profit, that it's going to be hard because, like, I mean, hell, it's as much of a capitalist profession as anyone else, where you're looking to maximize the profits for longevity and viability of the firm in the long run, right? But how do you do that? You control and kind of squirrel away all of your profits for those rocky periods of time. But sometimes the rocky periods of times are when you're losing talent. It's costing you more to replace them.
Yep, quite a bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, final 5B question. I want both of you, and I'll maybe be the last person to go here. What would you do in this questioner's shoes? If you were the questioner and you were kind of disillusioned by what you found out. Jeff, maybe this is really applies, I think, to where you were. We saw I know what you did. You've kind of explained it here. But if you were to do it all again, or let's just talk about advice, what advice would you give to this questioner about, like, where do you go when the news you get is not what you were hoping for? I think we've all gone out looking, and we've all gotten offers back that didn't meet expectations. Jeff, you talked directly. Okay, so where would you go from there?
Yeah. Luckily, we're within an industry where you have multiple facets. You've got the A and the E, and then you got the C, the O, and the BPM. I'm happy with the AE. Go look at manufacturers. Like, go look at contractors. Go look at owners.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They absolutely need a lot of spec writers' help.
Yes, definitely. And I will tell you that the pay is quite a bit better.
Yeah.
Right. It like, there's no doubt about it. There's no question. That's why you see a lot of architects go to that side. There's pros and cons, right? Maybe a little bit more travel here and there, or, maybe you're on the road a little bit more, whatever. But if you're looking for maybe a pretty big increase financially, yeah, go check out those other arms of the industry. You might be surprised.
What say you, Cormac?
Well, I mean, a lot of what Jeff just said, the advice that I would give is that you're going to find opportunities somewhere within the profession, whether you want to stay within the conventional firm framework. If you're looking at certain firms that don't value you or are not going to pay you what either you're getting paid now, which is kind of the point of the listener's question, or what your expectations are, there are firms out there that will.
Willing to move to find them for this kind of thing. Seems like this is a great role for that, right?
And that is an evolving opportunity as well, is looking at whether or not, hey, I want to take this job that might be on the other side of the country. However, I don't really want to relocate there. And a lot of firms are looking for more and more remote. And that's the opportunity. Yeah. It just depends. But then let's just say Jeff's a perfect example of how you answer this, because working in the conventional model gets you maybe job satisfaction or things like that. That's great. But if the loyalty isn't two ways and you're not feeling the love from the financial aspect, even though you literally have your hands in every single solitary project within the firm, then you look elsewhere. And then if you find that value outside in the CE, on the tech side of things, the contractor side of things, and things like that, go and do that. Go and look at how a manufacturer uses spec writers, which we know they do, because they're the ones who are having to help and craft and create all of the testing and all of that other stuff, and are influenced in that. The things that the architects are beating on the streets, like, I don't really want to know. I don't need to, as Evan, you were saying, we can't know everything within the specs. So, I mean, like, I don't know all of the new and updated code compliant testing that each of these products need to adhere to. And that's why I rely on the spec writer or the product manufacturer to tell me what it needs to conform to, and then help me guide my way into whether or not I'm detailing it right. Sometimes it may require a little bit more patience, but you're going to find the person out there that values you.
Get this out. And I think that can be a great challenge to take on. And maybe life doesn't allow for that at this time. I have no idea the actual situation when it comes to, obviously, the questioner feels like they should be making more money for the value that they provide. And I would say Cormac and I are kind of an example of this on some way, and I think Jeff, you are too. Like on some level, take your future into your own hands. And the way that Cormac and I did that was through starting this podcast. You can take the matters into your own hands and become an advocate for things, become a resource to others on the internet, like using the internet, right, to create something that brings together a community, get involved in, and maybe this person already is involved in different, CSI, and there's different conferences and things like that for networking. But there's lots of ways to share knowledge. Like I even think about Christine Williamson's Building Science Fight Club Instagram channel. It's just something that she started doing to show the world things that matter when it comes to detailing for waterproofing and other things as well. It's a way to share knowledge and become a recognized go-to expert in a field or in a role inside of the architectural profession. That opens opportunities. It opens recognition. Come speak on a podcast and build professional reputation adjacent to your firm where maybe you aren't getting what you need. And I can't tell you how many opportunities that's opened up professionally, personally for me. I'm kind of talking for Cormac too. Like there's just been we've been on panels. We've been invited to speak at places. We obviously have a following on the podcast, and people continue to show up and even ask great questions like the one asked today for us to answer. But my answer, a little different than the two guys who just spoke before me, is like, how can you take this into your own hands and do something with it and turn lemons into lemonade and maybe you don't leave the A side of the profession, but I think it's worth checking out and kind of knowing what your options are. There's lots of different ways to fulfill your talents in this industry and industry adjacent and figure out ways to accomplish your goal of making more money for the value, but also providing even more value and finding out. You don't have to know where it leads. It can actually lead in places you've never even dreamed of. So very good discussion. Thank you all for Thanks to our questioner for asking it. That's askarchispeak.com. Get your questions maybe addressed on the show. Ask good questions, well-formed questions, and give us enough context like this questioner did to really make something out of this episode that hopefully provides value to the audience. And Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today and to share your experiences, good and bad. I think that's something we don't want to sugarcoat our profession and make it sound like it's something that it's not. Like there's definitely challenges, and there's personal challenges as well as industry challenges that we're all dealing with. And I think it's worth saying them out loud, right? To go back to something you said earlier, like I have to say this out loud. It's what we're thinking, but the conversation that's in public is hopefully going to make a difference. So thanks for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.